hitting him with the baton. He's punching me, and we're just fighting. And I'm trying to keep distance using the baton. I'm trying to keep distance, but he just felt no pain, totally aggressive. And we're in the desert. And eventually, he punched me in the chest, and there was this big bush that I was backing up. I ended up, it was kind of timing. He punched me at the same time. I end up on my back over the bush, and now he's down on top of me, just punching and punching. And I'm doing my best to block him. Most of them are hitting my vest. He's not really punching at my face, which was interesting. And I'm doing most of them, trying to block them and deflect them. And I kept telling him to stop. And finally, I told him, like, stop or I'm going to shoot. And I drew my weapon and fired one round, and it hit him in the chest, and he jumped up. That stopped the threat. I was able to get back away from him, and then my responding units got there and were able to. He still tried to fight. We're able to take him into custody, and unfortunately, he passed away from that. Um, and the doctors said that it was not a lethal round. It was more that he had a lot of methamphetamine and alcohol in his system, and he kept trying to fight, that he basically pumped himself out of blood.
Can you introduce yourself for me, please?
I'm Steve O'Neill. I worked 22 years with the LA County Sheriff.
And Steve, tell me a little bit about growing up, family life. Was there anything that led you to law enforcement?
I would have to say it would be my father having a law enforcement career. Had an uncle and a couple other distant family members, cousins that all worked for LA County Sheriff, actually.
Was what kind of student were you? Were you into sports? Were you studious? I mean, can you give me an idea?
Yeah, I did. I think it's more that my parents wanted me to play, but I did. I played basketball because, I'm 5'3", so I'm perfect for that sport. But I played basketball. Yeah, in elementary school, I played soccer. And then you want me to get into like high school, college yet, or
Yeah, I mean, was there any? I mean,
high school? I ran cross country,
okay,
another short person sport.
but it was. Was there? I mean, are you competitive by nature? Were you driven in your academic studies? Were you smart?
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely had A's and B's most of the time. A couple of years I got straight A's. As far as sports and anything, being shorter, yeah, is very competitive because I don't see myself as having any less capabilities being shorter. So cross country, I ran on the varsity team, and that was a lot of work. It
Yeah.
was more mental than physical, being able to keep up with the taller runners, the longer legs, and so.
Yeah. So your dad was in law enforcement. Do you have brothers and sisters?
I do. I have a younger brother that's in law enforcement, and then an older brother that is just kind of in the private industry.
Okay. Do you think you're same reason why you went into law enforcement, your brother went into law enforcement? It's because of your dad?
He probably, yeah. He actually got into it about a year before I did. Um, just had his life together a little bit better than me.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I would say probably the same reasons.
Okay. But you didn't like say, this is what I want to do. I want to go into law enforcement. How did you kind of give me the path of how you ended up in law enforcement though?
Yeah, so typical teenager getting out of high school and not knowing what you want to do. I went to a little bit of college, and that kind of bored me. I went to a college prep school, so when I went to college not right out of high school, a little bit later, and so they wanted to put me back in classes that are regular college, like preliminary classes, and I was already a little bit more advanced from that, from going to a preparational high school. So I failed at it. I just dropped out is what I did. It just wasn't for me. And so I used to street race cars and got into cars and automotive. And I actually moved to Big Pine, California, and worked as a mechanic up there for a couple of years. And my good friend, him and his father were both paramedics. And I started getting into the emergency response world. So became an EMT, worked as an EMT for several years, and looking at getting into LA County Fire. But at the time, that was a really difficult thing. I forget the measure that had passed, but basically they were prioritizing Hispanics and females. So as a white male, they did it on a points-based system. So you got significantly more points for being Hispanic or female. And I might have been able to go that route, but I didn't really have a passion for it. And I started following the family career, and it had always kind of been like in my blood
Hmm.
per se. Just growing up with my father, the stories he'd come home with every night. He used to work down at Lennox, and he'd come home with these stories, and it was just arrests and different events that they had. And then he transferred up to the Antelope Valley near where we lived. And so then off duty and stuff, he would take us out and we would go do, like, he was never off duty. On his off time, he was scoping out cars or houses, drug labs and stuff. He was watching stuff, getting, background information. So when he was on duty, he knew what he was looking for. It was just, it was fun.
Yeah.
Well,
Your EMT career, how long did you do that for?
off and on, I want to say 2 to 3 years. I worked for two different ambulance companies, one
Okay.
up there, and then I came down here, or well, down Southern California and worked with AMR as I was processing through the sheriff's department.
I'm interested about the EMT portion of it. I spoke with another homicide detective, and he started off as a EMT, and the stuff that he saw, I don't want to say desensitized, but he saw some pretty horrific stuff that he said, "Hey, once I became a homicide detective, this stuff never bothered me." Did you see any horrible stuff like that, or do you think that being an EMT helped you out later on in your career with law enforcement?
I think it actually did. I've never thought of that before, but yeah, I did see some suicides and some pretty horrific stuff. And then just driving the ambulance itself, just the emergency response, it helps you get over that. So when you go into driver's training and patrol training, or you get in the radio car and you're rolling code, you don't as much get that overwhelming adrenaline rush. Um, it's very common for newer, any kind of emergency personnel when they drive code 3, that siren gets you to drive faster and faster and faster. And so driving a big heavy ambulance before driving a radio car certainly, I think, helped um, keep that reasonable, driving in a fast but safe and effective manner.
Yeah.
um,
In okay, so I'm going to transition real quick.
mhm.
So in '99, you start with the LA County Sheriff's Office, but one thing you said about the LA County Fire, which is they had this initiative to only hire Hispanics and females and minorities. Did you have that same issue with LA County Sheriff?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, okay. So they weren't making that push. Why wasn't that? If the fire department was doing that, why wasn't the sheriff's office doing that?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know.
All right. Was the fact that you went to LA County Sheriff, uh, that's who your dad was working for? Did you ever think about going to LAPD, or was it always LA County Sheriff?
Yeah, it was always LA County Sheriff.
Why was that?
Probably just because my father did, but also I would say geographically, LA County covered all of LA County, and I lived in Antelope Valley at the time.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't necessarily want to work where I lived, but the ability to go around the county or to live in an area and be able to work reasonably close by, like there was just a lot more options.
Okay.
LAPD, I would have to, no matter where I lived, I would have to drive to the same general city area. You
Yeah.
know,
Well, give me an idea of when you got hired. Well, first of all, when you got hired on, how old were you?
28.
28. Okay, so a little bit later on, compared to like a 21, 22-year old. Give me an idea of LA County Sheriff when you started. How many deputies did you have?
In
It,
my academy
no,
class.
no,
Yeah.
just in general. What's kind of the how big in general? If you know how big is.
I I've heard the numbers around 9 to 10,000.
Okay,
I don't know how accurate that
okay.
is.
How does that compare? I mean, 9 to 10,000 is a big agency. How does that compare to like LAPD? Do you know?
I don't know. I
Okay,
know that I believe we're a little bit smaller than New York,
okay.
but I think, at least at the time, I think we were the second largest.
Yeah, so that's a big department. Um, okay, so the difference between a sheriff's office and a police department is you typically have to start off in a jail. Did you have to do that?
Yes.
And tell me about how that was. As you came in as a 28-year-old and you're dealing with people in jail, how was that dealing in these correctional institutes or, county jails or whatever else? And how did that help you out later on when you got on patrol?
Absolutely. So going into the jails, like almost nobody wants to do it. Everybody wants to go to patrol. Like you want to go out and be a cop, but you earn a certain respect for the jails. So just learning behaviors, and if you take advantage of the opportunity, you can interview inmates. A lot of inmates, murderers, rapists, any of them, they'll talk to you, especially once they know that their case is settled and they're going off to state prison or whatever. They got nothing to lose. They'll talk to you. They'll tell you in just about anything you want to know. How they deal drugs, how they pass dope, how they get their guns, things like that. I mean, they won't give you exact contacts, not usually, but they will be pretty open about their operations. And so you can learn a lot about the language, the behaviors, the mannerisms, the gang life, or even if they're not in a gang, just straight criminal life, how they think, what drives them. And so it's a great opportunity to learn about the streets.
Did y- with LA being as big as it is, did you ever have the opportunity where you were dealing with somebody in the jail and later came across them on the street?
I did. It was well, there was a couple people names I ran through in jail that I actually knew them, and so just for safety measures, I would have them transferred so there's no connection. They wouldn't recognize me for safety of myself and or them.
Hmm.
Because a lot of times, they like to wave and say hello and everything, but then the other inmates will roll them up or tune
Yeah.
them up for being friendly with law enforcement. It just depends on what jail you're in and what you're in for, the security level of it, what kind of inmates they're around. But I did have one instance. It was actually before I or after I transferred from the jails. I transferred to Mariloma for a short period before I went to patrol, and that was a detention center. So basically, think of illegals that have committed crimes. They've served their time, and now they're no longer inmates or prisoners, but they're referred to as detainees. So they're being detained until they're deported. So they're not free to walk around the public anymore because they're illegal in their status. So they have a lot more freedoms, a lot more yard time to go out and roam around, and basically, other than being inside of a fenced area, they have a lot of freedoms. But and there they would talk a lot more. Part of my duties was a prowler, and that's just to walk around the yard and just make sure everything's running smoothly. And so you get to know a lot of these guys, especially the cooks and stuff. And anyways, one time I was heading down Mexico to go fishing, and we crossed the border after midnight, and the I can't remember what you call it, the place where you get your so we if you go past Guerrero Negro in Mexico for, I think it's longer than 3 days. If you're going to be down there longer, you have to get a special pass. So you go to this office, and at that time of night, it's closed. You have to walk down the back alleys and around the back of the building, and they have a little window you go up to. And we walk up there, and there's an LA County bus, and there's all these detainees getting off, and they're all just kind of, now they're free and they're back in Mexico, so they're just kind of walking. And I happen to be looking over, and this guy, I see him make eye contact, and his eyes pop, and he's like, "Deputy O'Neill," and I'm like, "Holy crap!" I'm down here in Mexico. And he was friendly and good, but we get our stuff and we got out of there quick, just in case. That was not a comfortable feeling.
But I'm
So
assuming that, with the guy waving to you and everything else, I mean, I think it makes you tell me, it makes a lot of difference of how you treat these inmates when they're
oh, absolutely.
incarcerated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I found through my career that whether on the streets, dealing with someone who committed a crime, dealing with a victim, or someone who's incarcerated, if you treat them with respect, most of the time you're going to get respect back. And so if they don't treat me with respect back, I treat them equally. Always professionally,
Hmm.
but I treat them equally.
Yeah.
And in the gang life and in the jails, I was not a gang expert. I didn't get into that, but you get enough of that knowledge. In the gang life, everything runs off respect. So you can go into a dorm room, and like when I worked in custody, I think there were 96 people in a dorm. And especially when you're on training, you go in there by yourself and you do count at 2, 3 in the morning. You do count several times a night. And so I'm in there with 96 inmates in the dark, low lights, and counting all the heads on the bunks. And you got to count all 96 and make sure your counts match. And if they don't respect you, you don't get all the way in the back of a very large dorm room in the dark with 96 people and not have a problem. So if you treat them like crap or you belittle them or anything, you're not going to have a good time in the jails.
Did you ever, I mean, geez, being by yourself with 96, 90, whatever inmates, you ever worry about your safety?
Oh yeah, it's intimidating. But that helps you to mind yourself when you're talking to them or when you're dealing with them. Um, how you speak to them, how you don't speak to them in fear. You speak to them with authority, but respectfully.
Hmm.
There's a lot of it's interesting because on our department, um, they don't like you to cuss. It's we're not supposed to. It's not professional, but there are people that they don't listen to you until some cuss words come out, until you get really stern. I don't know. Maybe it's just how they were raised, how they were spoken to. But until you start getting a little more heavy, they don't listen. But the majority of them, if you talk to them like you and I are right here, you talk
Hmm.
to them like they're a human being, which they are, who made a mistake. Most of those people are going to level with you and talk, admit that, yeah, I shouldn't have done that, deputy,
Yeah.
and they'll go and do it again. But the point is, it calms the situation. Now they admit what they did, or they're good with their discipline. When we're talking in the jails and you're issuing out discipline, if you just come in there and treat them like crap all the time, they have no respect for you. But if you come in there and go, look, you did this, you screwed up. This is what's going to happen. Most of them are like, okay, you got me. You're right.
Hmm. Anything surprising to you starting off in the jail?
Surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, was there anything that you weren't expecting, or did you go in with kind of, maybe you had these discussions with your dad, where you kind of knew what to expect once you got into the jail, or was there something that you got in there and like, holy mackerel, I didn't expect that, or you know,
I would say not really any surprises for me.
okay,
But again, like what you just said, my brother started, I believe, about a year before me.
hmm,
And then all the stories from my father. Yes, I think I was fairly well prepared.
okay, okay. So you work in the jail for how long?
It depends. I mean, everybody's different. It depends on which station you have in for, if it's a fast moving station or a slower station. Some stations people go to retire at and they stay there forever.
Yeah.
And they don't promote. And so there's not a lot of movement. I wanted to go to faster stations. So I was in custody, let's see, 99, 2000, just about 3 years, I want to say. So I spent like 6, 8 months in the jails, and then I went over to Mariloma to the detention facility, and I worked there for a little over 2 years, I believe.
Okay. So when you get out, what station are you working at?
I went to Lancaster Station.
Okay. Was there a reason why you went to Lancaster? Was that somewhere you wanted to go?
Uh, it's where my father retired out of,
Okay.
but also it was the closest station to where I live.
Uh huh.
More so, it was very busy. So at the time, Palmdale and Lancaster. This is after they used to be Lancaster, or I'm sorry, Antelope Valley Station. They separated in Palmdale and Lancaster as the Antelope Valley grew. Um, at the time I went to Lancaster Station, Lakewood had been the busiest station, but it covers 5 cities. Lancaster and Palmdale both went back and forth for the busiest stations, right behind Lakewood, and they're each in one individual cities.
Hmm.
Um, but when I went to Lancaster, there were 30. They were so overworked. It was so busy. There was an average, I think that one time they said there was an average of 600 calls a day, 900 on the weekends, 600 on a regular day. It was busy. And when I got there, there were 32 law enforcement personnel off IOD, so injured on duty, not working.
Wow.
Um, and sadly, my position to transfer over there came when a deputy had committed suicide. So people were stressed, people were very overworked,
Hmm.
and here I am starting my career excited, but coming into a lot of work, a lot of drafted overtime hours and forced work. So.
When you get to Lancaster, is there any sense, because your dad retired there, is there any sense of, I have to prove myself? Did people still remember your dad? Um, was there any kind of residual effect of your dad being at that station?
So, not to brag, but my father was kind of a legend on the department. And the reason I say that is everywhere I went, I was told, you've got big shoes to fill.
Mm.
You've got big shoes to fill. And, even hanging out with my dad, his buddies would be like, John, you remember this? You remember that? He loved his career and he took that very passionately. Um, I think a lot of it had to do with, so his father was killed in the Battle of the Bulge. He met his father when he was 2 months old, so he doesn't remember.
Mm.
And then when he was 10 months old, his father was killed back in, I believe, in France or somewhere back there. I know he's buried in France. I don't know where the battle was,
But with that being said, with the big shoes to fill, did you feel the pressure?
oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I think that my dad's really always been involved in war and the battles and history, and I think that fueled his like law enforcement because he didn't go into the service. He actually did get drafted, and he was back east when he got pulled off the train because he was a sole surviving son. And so when he went into law enforcement, I think that became his passion. Um, and then having all those stories coming in. Um, I found out once I was actually working that all the stuff he would tell us, it wasn't bragging. It was like true. He was a hard worker. He got into a lot of stuff, solved a lot of crimes, arrested a lot of people. And yeah, I was regularly told I had big shoes to fill.
Which is interesting. When did that? So obviously you've got this pressure. You have big shoes to fill. But did it also help that you knew your dad was a hard worker, so it kind of instilled a hard worker attitude in you as well?
Absolutely. Yeah.
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 Okay.
To the point where, I mean, there was, when I first started on training, especially when I got off training, when you're on training, I had 3 different training officers. When you're on training, you're kind of under their guidance. So what you do falls on them. But when I first got off training, I had the one side telling me I had big shoes to fill. Can I fill them? Can I last? And then I had the other side of guys telling me, slow down. You're making us look lazy. Stop what you're doing. So I had it from both sides, and it's like, well, obviously I'm going to listen to the positive side of,
Right.
you got big shoes to fill, and I'm going to do an honest day's work and try to get out there and do my personal best. But
So you start off in the jail when you're 28, 3 years later, 31 or so. So you're on patrol. When you first get on patrol, how is that feeling? Is there a fear? Is there a anticipation? How is that being first time on patrol?
that's a whole mix of adrenaline, or a whole mix of emotions, because I think, when you're on training, there's a whole lot of concern and pressure to get off of training. But once you're off, now everything's on you, all the decisions. And it's like an adrenaline rush that doesn't end until near the end of your career, So, like daily, if you're out there working hard and you're not just sitting around waiting for a call to come out, you're out there working hard and you're pulling over cars and the hairs on the back of your neck are sticking up every time you approach a car that's got people moving around in it. They're hiding dope or going for a weapon. It's one big adrenaline rush, and yeah, it's intimidating, it's scary, it's exciting. It's just a whole mix of emotions that, I mean, you just have to be in it.
Yeah.
It's I've talked to several people that went on a ride along, and they thought it was awesome, but you just, I went on ride alongs before. You still don't experience what you feel as a brand new officer, for sure.
So do you go through the academy? How long is your FTO program?
You mean for me being on training?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How long? Like you're with FTO, field training officer, for how long?
I think the standard is 6 months.
Okay.
You know, if you're really good, I
Okay.
think I got off training in 5 months. They signed me off, or
Okay.
5 months and a week.
But you're going through,
Um,
you go through academy, you go through, you're basically 5 months with a FTO. Is there a sense once you start doing this by yourself, is there a like, oh my gosh, do I really know the law? Do I know what I'm doing? Is there a sort of that feeling just kind of getting to know what the job is all about?
yeah, and I imagine that's different for everybody.
Mhm.
So again, having a prior law enforcement career, um, one of the things I did before when I was in training and before I started was ask my dad to let me review good reports, different
Mm.
types of reports.
Okay.
So you're getting a much broader sense. You could go in to the station early and you had all the report boards there, so you could, talk to people like who are the deputies that write really good reports, make really good quality arrests, the ones that get filed without a question, the ones that go to court and it's just the defense takes a deal because it's such a solid arrest and report. You want to know who's doing it the best, and you read those reports, and so you get a lot of knowledge. So a lot of times you get out there and you know that you have a crime, but now maybe you have to research it a little bit, or you have to call over a supervisor and say, hey, this is what I got. And as you gain experience, that happens less and less. You have to, you know ask for help or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'd say, with all the training, all of the study books and guides about the law that we go through over the 6, can't remember how long training is. I think it was 24 weeks, 18 to 24 weeks, somewhere in there. They shortened it at one point, but you get a quite a bit of knowledge in all the learning domains about the law, and where you have the right to do things and right not to do things. And so you have a pretty good knowledge of it out there. But yeah, it's still, you still question yourself. I think any good person is always going to question yourself, to hold yourself to the highest amount of integrity, honesty, and just perception of what you're seeing or what's going on.
Yeah.
Because nobody says you got me, I committed a crime. So one of my biggest things, even from the very beginning, I loved RC arrests.
What's okay,
Um,
what is that?
that's reasonable cause arrest.
Okay.
So that, for someone who doesn't know, that is like a crime that is about to be committed but hasn't been committed yet, a crime that is in the commission, or a crime that has already been committed but maybe you don't have evidence or enough to prove it right this moment, but you have reasonable cause to believe that a crime is one of those three criteria: about to be, is in the process, or has been committed. And so you can make an arrest based on that. And then you have to document in your report why you believe this person is about to commit a crime of burglary, or why you believe they're in the commission of it when you drove up and they stopped and you can't like prove it yet. But that all goes into your interview of the person you have detained. It goes into evidence you find in the car. Maybe it's just burglary tools and late at night, certain place that they're around where they shouldn't be. So all of that has to be documented as to why that is. And
What
so those were my favorite
Yeah,
arrests.
why do you think you gravitated toward reasonable cause arrests?
I don't know. I grew up with my father hunting, not hunting big game, just like going out in the desert and shooting jackrabbits and stuff. So it was always like the thrill of the hunt,
Mhm.
to find and do something, prove something. So that got into a little more of like not only the thrill of the hunt down and find a crime, but then the detective skills. I never went into DB. I tested for it, and I didn't.
What's DB?
Detective Bureau.
Okay.
I honestly, I tested for it. That's it. I didn't join the study groups. I didn't study hard for it. I didn't put a lot of passion into it, and because I just loved patrol so much. But yeah, those RC arrests, it had a little bit of everything. You're going out, driving around, looking for something that is you perceive would be a crime or criminal intent, and then finding it, and then investigating it, and then being able to prove it, and then document it, and then sometimes not always going to court on it. And so it's just the whole process was just, I loved it.
Something you just mentioned there, I find it interesting. So you tested for detective bureau, but you never really pursued anything other than patrol. I mean, you go into training a little bit later that we're going to talk about, but you know, you just like patrol. That
I
was it.
loved it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
loved it.
Was it just because of the action and?
Yeah. I mean, I think you get addicted to the adrenaline.
Hmm.
I mean, who needs Red Bull when you're getting a constant burst of adrenaline in your heart?
Yeah.
You know, it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot of freedom, a lot of camaraderie with if you have good sister cars and stuff. So,
Hmm. Okay,
mm.
so you get on patrol. Is there a type of crime, or what are you doing on patrol, and is there something that you then kind of specialize in? Is there something that you like to do on patrol more than something else?
So patrol at the very minimum is just patrolling the city streets, keeping things safe, being highly visible. It's proven that if it's proven like there's something called a traffic index, and they teach you that the more tickets written, the better traffic stays moderate, less accidents, less speeding. But then there was another study done, and I don't remember the names of the studies, that disproves that. It's actually the fact that they see cops giving tickets, it's just the high visibility, the presence of law enforcement vehicles that people slow down. You don't even have to give tickets, just being highly visible. So that's one of the reasons LA County Sheriff has a lot of one-man cars versus two. They have more cars driving around. They have a lot quicker response times with one man over two, and it's just high visibility. But where was I going with that?
Oh, I was just asking you, once you got on patrol, was there something that you like to
Oh,
specialize
yes,
in?
yes. So at the very basic, high visibility, keeping the public safe in that sense, and responding to calls. So calls come out for report calls or crimes. You're responding to calls, any type of emergency things. But then you have the proactive deputies that are out there looking to prevent crime. I don't want to wait for a report call and just take a report. I got into burglaries. I worked early mornings most of my career, and I loved just driving around looking for people who were casing out. Most of the time it was cars, people smashing car windows and breaking into cars.
Hmm.
And that was my love.
And then you also started dealing with a lot of stolen cars, right?
Yeah, that was actually in the Antelope Valley. As I started getting into burglaries, that was more when I transferred to Malibu Lost Hills.
Okay.
'Cause there was just a lot of burglary out there, rich neighborhoods and a lot of burglary. But yeah, the Antelope Valley stolen cars, I forgot about that.
Eh,
That was exhilarating.
can you talk a little bit about the stolen cars in terms of how hard you were working and how that was basically upsetting the older guys who were interrupting their breakfast?
Yeah, yeah. So with the stolen cars, it got to be there was quite a few guys that loved getting stolen cars, and at the time I was out there, there was a couple theft rings going on. One of them we knew were taking the cars to a chop shop, and other ones they were stealing like old Toyota Camrys just because you could jam something in the key lock, like scissors and stuff, twist it and jam it in the ignition. Just old, technology, just start them up and they would run, and so they were real easy to steal. But what they were doing was they'd steal a car, go probably commit some burglaries, dump it, steal another car, dump it, whatever. So they'd steal several cars in a night, and you'd like find one, and then you'd go to where it was stolen from and find another one dumped. And so it was kind of fun. And then there was highway patrol had a 10851 pin that you could earn. So if they recognized you and gave you a pin, if you recovered so many stolen cars in a year, I think it was 12. I can't remember what it was. Maybe it wasn't a year. It was a certain amount of time. I think it was 12 recovereds or six um, stolen cars where you arrest the driver. And they had all kinds of criteria on it. You couldn't arrest the passenger because they might not have known it was stolen. It had to be the driver. Um, Things like that. Because the fun thing about stolen cars is if you catch a stolen, not just recover a stolen, but you get a stolen that's rolling, almost always goes into a pursuit, and almost always they jump out of the car and they run. So you got arrow, you got units, you're coordinating to catch the driver and any passengers, and it's a lot of fun. Um, but with that particular ring that they were driving around the Camrys, oftentimes they're returning from their crimes at 5, 6 in the morning. So I worked, I think, 10 to 6. I got off at 6 every morning. The new crew's coming on, and 6 in the morning is usually dead. So they go to briefing, they get out. There's no calls. Everybody's asleep. There's really not much crime going on. They'd go and meet up and grab a bite of breakfast and kind of talk about their shift or whatever. Um, and then here's like O'Neill, 10:33, give me the patch. I'm in pursuit of a 10:29 Victor. And, there were several times I'd get these messages like, again, like, trying to eat my breakfast. And they're like, oh, why do you always have to do this? And I'm like, it's the only time that these things are rolling, it's the easiest time to catch them because a lot of them too would be early morning startups. Somebody'd come out at 5:30 in the morning in the winter and leave their car running in the driveway. So somebody just steal it for, I don't know, because it was fun. I don't know. So you'd catch those too. And it was,
So, Steve, talk a little bit about, I mean, with respect to interrupting the old guy's breakfast and everything else, there was kind of a theme that if you were working hard, there were other people that kind of getting pissed that maybe you were making them look bad. I mean, describe that to me.
yeah. So it's interesting. We don't have quotas. There was actually, it was in Palmdale. There was a motor that didn't write enough tickets, and his sergeant like gave him a quota. There was a big lawsuit behind that because we don't and we can't require quotas. You just go out and do an honest day's work and do your job.
Hmm.
But probably once you get to your end of your career and you just don't want to be running busy and writing a million reports, you just want to start like cruising into retirement. I think it was probably more of those guys that just, they're like, yeah, you're out here making arrest and arrest and arrest and arrest. And then pretty soon the sergeant's like doing briefings like, hey, we're making these good arrests and stuff. What are you doing?
Yeah.
I don't know what they experienced. I just know they told me that you're making us look bad. You're out here busy all the time, like slow down.
Yeah, yeah,
And
which
then I
is
was told by the go-getters, like, don't listen to them. You're one of us. We're out here hooking and booking and, solving crimes. And so,
Yeah, that's interesting. So you have two factions. You have the factions that are really kind of working and doing their job, and then you have these other guys that just kind of want to cruise. But then on the flip side, they're kind of bad mouthing you guys for really doing the job, and it's like just you know what I mean? It's just a
yeah,
weird dynamic for sure.
you're right.
Okay, so early on in your career, I think you said maybe about a year on patrol, you end up getting into shooting. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's actually a good thing to talk about to understand how law enforcement works as far as just being out on patrol. So, excuse me a second. I was on that particular day, I was working an East Side car early mornings. I got off at, I think I worked an 11 to 7 car that day. So this call came out, I want to say around 6 o'clock, 6:10, something like that. And I happened to be on the west side of town. I think there was a previous call. And so there were only three of us on shift at that time that I recall. I was the early morning east side car. There was another east side car, and then there was one west side car because some shifts come on at 6 and some come on at 7. So it was a little bit of a shift change there. And car call came out for a rollover TC, and we had all three met up or had just left a call, and I was closest to the TC. And after we had left, we had just started splitting up. I was driving back to the east side, so I actually, this is all probably irrelevant, but I put out on my radio that my portable that I was responding, and my sister car, who was actually a traffic car for the west side, he grabbed his car radio, which overpowers the portables usually. So he had to happen to grab it at the same time. So unbeknownst to me, they didn't hear my traffic. And I was already en route to another call on the east side. So they think I'm going east. He's going to the call. We end up over there together, and there's nobody at the car, and it's upside down. And then we start getting these little updates. The driver is seen running through a neighborhood, hopping walls. So we get on to LTAC, which is a separate channel. It's more of a car to car. They don't hear it downtown so much. And I tell my partners, hey, I'm rolling down this street. And they actually were much newer than I was, not familiar with the area. So they drove the wrong direction. And I went down and I ended up finding the driver. And he's running, and this call comes out over the main radio that he is trying to pound his way onto a school bus. And When I get there, the school bus is driving away and he's running again. And so now we're thinking, was this a stolen car? Why is he running? He's trying to get onto the school bus. What is going on here? What crimes do we have? Turns out the school bus had pulled over for the ambulance and fire trucks roll into the accident. And that's when he tried to get onto the school bus. And
Mm.
there were kids on the bus. Right, this is school starting. So he's running, and I pull up kind of behind him, and I get on the loudspeaker. I tell him to stop, and he does. And I get out of my car, and with his behavior, the first thing I did was grabbed our taser, and it was the old M26s, which were they were the newer version of the taser at the time, a handheld that shoots out darts, but they were not super effective. And I learned that mine. I learned later that mine was actually malfunctioning. It was only giving about 50% power. But I grabbed that and just put it in my back pocket just to have all my less lethal options available because his behavior just it told me something wasn't right here. And it kind of confused me a little bit. Some of my ambulance knowledge, I know that, if you hit your head and you get kind of an altered level of consciousness, you might. So maybe he's not even, maybe he rolled over, fell asleep, and just out of it, uh, uh, you know. But then he starts walking towards me. I told him to come on over to the car, and I'm on the driver's side and he's on this side, so a little bit of distance. And he just starts screaming in the back window of my car. So it's rolled up, and he's just looking into the cage area and he's just screaming. Okay, something's not right. This guy's not right. So I gave him a couple commands, and he just starts running down the street. So I put out on our LTAC traffic that, hey, this guy's running, and I'm following him in my radio car. So I'm just driving behind him, hoping my backup gets there so we can deal with this guy. But he gets to a lot. So there's houses here, then there's still a few houses under construction. There's a street, and then there's a big empty lot, and there's a lot of construction debris, concrete and big dirt clods and stuff from all the leftover. That's where they're going to build next, but that's just where they're dumping everything. He runs into that lot, and so now I get to the curb and I park my car and I get out, and I'm just telling him, hey, stop running, come on over here. And he starts running at me. And he picks up this really big, it turned out to be a dirt clod, but picks up this really big like dirt clod, and he starts running at me with it over his head. And so I fire the taser at him, and he drops it, and he starts to try to run away. Well, I'm now putting out traffic over our dispatch. And it was confusing to our dispatch because they didn't even know I was there. They thought I was going to the other side of town. So they're trying to get things coordinated, and my other units start responding. And now I've got these taser leads attached to him. So rather than let him break away and keep running, I'm just kind of jogging with him, and I keep reactivating the taser, trying to buy time because it wasn't obviously effective enough to drop him. And at some point, he turns around and he just starts rolling up the cords and rips them out of the gun, and breaks through the copper wires, and then he just comes at me. And so now I pull out my baton and we're fighting. And I think he was 5'7" or 5'8", 170, 180 pounds, and I'm 5'3", 140. And he's clearly on some type of drugs or something, so he's not feeling any pain. I mean, he's just, I'm hitting him with the baton, he's punching me, and we're just fighting. And I'm trying to keep distance using the baton. I'm trying to keep distance, but he just felt no pain, totally aggressive. And we're in the desert, and eventually he punched me in the chest, and there was this big bush that I was backing up. It was kind of timing. He punched me at the same time. I end up on my back over the bush, and now he's down on top of me, just punching and punching. And I'm doing my best to block him. Most of them are hitting my vest. He's not really punching at my face, which was interesting. And I'm doing most of them, trying to block him and deflect him. And I kept telling him to stop. And finally I told him, like, stop or I'm going to shoot. And I drew my weapon and fired one round. And it hit him in the chest, and he jumped up. That stopped the threat. I was able to get back away from him. And then my responding units got there and were able to, he still tried to fight. We're able to take him into custody. And unfortunately, he passed away from that. And the doctors said that it was not a lethal round. It was more that he had a lot of methamphetamine and alcohol in his system, and he kept trying to fight, that he basically pumped himself out of blood.
Hmm.
So
How was that experience for you, Steve? I mean, most people, 99% of people, never never get in that situation and never have to take another person's life. And obviously, maybe that shot isn't lethal and he pumps himself out because of the drugs. But how did that affect you mentally?
That was hard. That
Yeah.
was hard. You think, and even myself, having the stories from my dad, you think that you're immune to all that, that like you're trained and you're immune to all that. And you have the legal authority to defend your life and the lives of others. And, in a situation like that where it's him against me, they did all kinds of psychological evaluations on it and everything. And they said he was so high on drugs. He didn't see me. He saw the uniform and the loss of his freedom. And he was just, it's probably why he didn't punch me in the face. He was just fighting the uniform,
Hmm.
and there was no stopping him in that drug psychosis he was in. But even given all that and being totally justified, it's still horrible. It doesn't feel good taking someone's life, and it doesn't feel good for a long time after that. It still gives me chills just to think that, that's so unnecessary.
What kind of services does LA sheriffs did they give you? Did you get to go to a counselor? How did that work?
Yeah, so it used to be mandatory time off, then it became voluntary. So I did take a couple of days off, and they have psychologists that you speak with. Um, and so, yeah, I talked with him, and, everything from the very beginning, Department of Justice, ICIB, which is Internal Criminal Bureau, Internal Affairs Bureau, everybody cleared it. I mean, it was a very clear, clean, and justified shooting. Um, there was no big lawsuits behind it. Like they threatened a small lawsuit, and the county said, "Okay, we'll go to court on it." And then the other side's attorney said, "Like we have nothing. Like just it's over." So there was nothing behind it. It was very clean, and but it's still just like it weighs heavy on you. It really does. I didn't sleep for a long time after that. I have some injuries out of that. I think falling backwards and hitting my head and neck really hard and just in the desert and being in that fight. Everything's tensed up, nothing's loose.
Hmm.
So I have long-term injuries from it as well. But
But I'm curious because I know how most law enforcement guys are, right? You get your time off, go talk to a counselor, and people go, "Yeah, I'm good,"
mhm.
right? Did they make you two questions? Did they make you go? It was mandatory for you to go see a counselor. Did they make you go once, or did they say, "Hey, we want you to see a counselor for, a series"? Um, how did it work?
I I think it, I think that would be up to the counselor,
Okay.
if I'm correct. And I don't know if things have changed since then,
Okay.
but I believe it depends on like your session with them and how it goes.
Hmm.
Like mine, it was so clean and clear and justified that like logically, I didn't have to question myself. Did I do the right thing?
Hmm.
Was I justified? So it's just about the matter of, for me at least, it was just about the matter of I took a life.
Yeah.
And the counselor helped me to see some of that. And I didn't, I don't, I think I only went to one session, but I remember, so I'm the religious side of me. I remember being a little bit troubled with it. And I went and talked to one of our priests, and that helped me a lot too, because there was, I was fighting and I fired one round. I
Hmm.
didn't pummel the guy with a bunch of rounds. I had no intent to kill someone or take a life.
Yeah.
I had an intent to stop his threat. I told him several times, to stop. And I fired one round, jumped up, gathered my distance. They teach you, in most scenarios, to fire 2 to 3 rounds. Your goal is to not to kill, but to stop the threat. And oftentimes, one bullet, most people can run through that. It's not like the movies where you shoot someone and they fly back 15 feet and they're done, or you shoot them with a taser and they're unconscious for 5 minutes. You shoot someone with a taser and it hurts, and as soon as it's over, they're ready to get back up.
Yeah.
That's the way it is. You shoot someone with one round or 2 rounds and they're on drugs, likelihood is if they have a gun, they're going to be able to still shoot back or still attack you. So that one round gave me time to jump back, reassess. My team got there, and and it was over. So having all that and breaking all that down really helped me to like set my mind at ease that even like spiritually and religiously, like I did what I could. I did everything I could, um, to the best of my abilities. And
But your situation seems pretty clean cut. So I'm just wondering about your own opinion. Do you think whether it's clean cut, whether it's a little bit more complicated, whatever else, would you recommend seeing somebody once? Would you recommend saying, "Hey, it's good seeing somebody once, but maybe go a couple times and talk a little bit more." I mean, what do you have an opinion about that?
I agree with the latter of that. I would say it would be good to go because a lot of a lot of what we're taught is, to be able to be strong through tough situations, to be
Mhm.
able to be strong through emotional situations. And that's something that I think hits people deep, even when they don't think it would. And it might come back up weeks later, months later. So I think talking several times would help them process, because the initial thing is like, we can't let situations like that take us down. What if there's another threat? Or what if you're out a week later and something similar happens? Like, we can't, you've got a millisecond to make a decision like that. You don't have time to go, wait, let me get my emotions right. Let me process this, and then act. You have to act like this all the time.
Yeah.
And you have to act on training. You have to act on instinct a lot of times, and your knowledge of the law and what's going on. So I think a lot of times, like, the intention or the thought process, you go see the psychologist and you're strong. I'm good. I can handle it, but can you? I don't know.
Yeah.
I would probably recommend a little more sessions than less. I think it would certainly help people.
Okay. All right. So getting on later on in your career, um, emergency services, is that another? That's another. I don't want to say department. It's another thing that you end up doing, or no?
I didn't end up doing it, but I was interested in it because of my
Okay.
prior. So ESD, Emergency Services Detail.
Okay.
Those are the guys that become paramedics. They do like the rappelling and in and out of the helicopter, the big Sikorsky, the Air 5, they call it. So
Okay.
they're doing the mountain rescues. They're doing all the really cool
Oh,
stuff.
okay.
Is
Okay.
is what I thought. I believe they're a branch of SEB, Special Enforcement Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, awesome stuff. But I didn't end up doing it for a couple of reasons. One, I lived up in the Antelope Valley, and where I would drive to would be 65, 70 miles every day,
Wow.
lots of hours, and then you're on call a lot. It's a lot of training, and I had two young children and had gone through a divorce. So I was a single father for quite a while, doing this job, working early mornings. They'd sleep at my mom's house at night, and then I'd come home, and I had a 1 year old and a 2.5 year old,
Yeah.
and I've been up all night. And so all day, like, how do you sleep with a 1 year old? You don't, you stay there. And so for at least 2 years, I spent a lot of my life awake as a zombie. Like, my mom she worked in the courts. So she'd leave at 8 and get home at 4. You'd eat dinner really quick, and I'd sleep from like 5 to 9, and then it was back to work. So for 2 years, I got maybe 3 to 4 hours of sleep on a good day throughout my career.
Yeah, and so this is always a question that I ask at the end, but I'll ask it to you now. How do you think being in law enforcement? I mean, it sounds like you were putting in hours, and I know that we talked about this as well. Just kind of shorthanded and the adrenaline, and you're always wanting to work and putting in the overtime and kind of providing for your family and stuff. How did those long hours? How did law enforcement affect your family?
You know, my family that was used to it understood it and supported it. I
Hmm.
think my wife at the time, I don't know that she did. And when our marriage started falling apart, like, she didn't really communicate. So I don't know what the breakdown was.
Well,
But
let me ask you a question about that marriage right there. Did she go in? Did you guys meet when you were a police officer, and she, or was it before?
before, yeah,
Okay, so she didn't know what to expect.
correct,
Okay.
correct. And we got divorced, basically in my time in custody, not when I went out to patrol. So not even through the meat and potatoes of the patrol training, the hard stuff,
Wow.
just the custody. So I don't know if mine was particularly related to law enforcement and long hours, because I wasn't working a lot of patrol. And so, like I said, when I came on with 30 bodies IOD,
Mm-hmm.
there was constant drafts overtime. And as a trainee, you didn't get drafted. You were
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, I'll do it. I'll take it. That's just what you do,
Yeah.
you know? um, but yeah, so that wasn't a matter of it. When I met her, she wasn't, how do I say this respectfully? She had trouble within her family and stuff.
Okay.
And so we had talked about it before, like being um, falling in love with me and getting married and stuff was probably like one of the best things that happened in her life as far as moving towards the right direction
Mm-hmm.
of what she wanted in life and getting away from her family and the way they lived life. But I think she kind of fell back into it with me being gone a lot, the like postpartum depression on our second child, and having to do a lot of that by herself, because even in custody, I was working a lot of hours, not as bad as patrol, but there was a lot of overtime and a lot of, I was working early mornings. So I was sleeping all day when the kids are active. She's doing it all herself.
Mm-hmm.
And so just the busyness of the job, the hours and stuff, I would say that definitely had an effect on my marriage for sure and my family life.
Yeah, because you had mentioned something about being there for your family physically, but not necessarily mentally.
Correct.
Yeah.
Not mentally, you're not with the right attitude, not with the right presence of mind, and even through my whole career, like I did a lot with my children. Um, did a whole lot with them. They were both in sports. My daughter played softball from the time she was like yay tall all the way through college. And so all through high school, she played on a competitive travel team. So it was driving all over the county for practices and tournaments and everything. So I worked early mornings to get off at 6. Then it was like drive home, pick her up, and go to a tournament. Sleep in the car while they practice. Sleep between games. Watch the games, drive home, and then go straight back to work without a wink of sleep after that. It was a lot of hard, long days. I did it because I love them and I was there. And they tell me I was a great dad. Still am, is what they tell me. They acknowledge all that, but I feel like I was just a zombie. I was driving to the games, watch them. It was about the game. I don't feel like I was as present as I could be. And so, my advice would be like, don't get so much into the job that it becomes your passion above your family, you know?
Yeah, it's
Um,
interesting that you mentioned what your kids said, because that was what I was going to ask you is how did your kids view it? I mean, they didn't.
mm.
They clearly viewed you still as a good dad, and
I don't think seeing it differently, they knew a difference, but now being more mature, now being retired, and being able to be more present and work on myself, um, the way my relationships, whether it's family, friends, acquaintances, loved ones, how I talk to people, how I treat people, how I listen and spend time with them is vastly different. And I wish I had that presence for my wife and children back then.
mm,
My current wife.
yeah,
so, let's just so when she watches this, just so that's clear,
yeah,
my current wife, because she is an amazing woman. She came in at when my daughter was, let's see, 2 and my son was 3.5, 4. She came in and she raised them, and they call her mom. Like my ex just kind of got into drugs and all kinds of other stuff, and just kind of abandoned the children in that sense. So they call her mom, and they grew up with her being a mother figure. And she always told them, like, I won't try to replace your mother. I'll just try to be a good mother for you. And she was a very supportive wife and a very good mother. So
your current wife though, she married you in the middle of the job, so
yes, yeah.
she ever have any issues with it, or she knew what she was getting into?
I think she learned to know what she was getting into. I don't think she knew ahead of time, but
Hmm.
just talking with family and um, stuff, she understood. Her and I had very good communication skills. Um, she told me that, you know, she never worried about me. She saw in my family and me our confidence and our one of the things she would always point out is like, "Hey, I'm over here," when we'd be out and about. And I'm like, "I know." And she's like, "Well, how come you don't look at me?" And it's like, just my general life, like you're always scanning for threats. It's just, I don't know if all law enforcement are like this, but I grew up like this. Like everything is a threat until you proceed, until you prove it not. So, because especially when you work in an area where close to where you live, you don't know who's going to recognize you. You don't know, you take away a lot of people's freedoms for a living, for good reason, but that doesn't mean that they don't see you on the streets and want to get retribution for it or payback. It doesn't mean they believe it's fair. Um, so yeah, everywhere we go, and that's another thing. It was hard to be present with family or kids, is because I was always looking for, scanning for threats, like observing things.
Which is interesting because you mentioned about your dad. Your dad would never go into a McDonald's to eat because of that
Oh yeah.
exact reason.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I never go anywhere. Even now, retired, you won't find me almost anywhere in public, and I'm not armed. Even on a boat out on the lake, I'm armed. It's on me. It's not in a backpack or whatever. It's just the way I live life. It's a code of mine now. Even the world today, like you never know. And it's like I'm professionally trained to defend a threat or defend my family, and that's how I'll die. Is the job never goes away. But as far as you're talking about McDonald's, so my dad would never eat in a restaurant. If we had to go in a restaurant or anything, he'd do the typical law enforcement thing, which is sit with your back to a wall, sit in a back corner, be able to view the openings and exits and things like that. But he would avoid that if at all possible. So one of the things my mother hated is whenever we'd take any kind of road trip or drive to see family, he always had to go out to eat. It was usually McDonald's. And no kidding, as soon as we left McDonald's, every single time we would drive to the underpass and go up under the underpass in the car and get out and eat everything on the trunk. And oftentimes there were other radio cars there eating their lunch. And my dad would be talking with them, and it would be us and my mom and us kids and a bunch of cops, or two or three other cars, all eating out on the trunk, because you got the overpass, you got it to your back, and you can see all out. So it's interesting. He never ate. He's just like always watching his back.
Yeah, so kind of the last question I always ask, and obviously you've already sort of answered this, but I got kind of a twofold question here is when you look back on your life when you before you even started law enforcement until now,
Mhm.
do you think your attitudes toward people have changed? Now you specifically mentioned, and this is a pretty prevalent theme going on, which is cops are always aware of what's going on, no matter during the job, after the job, everything else. But how about for people? Do you think your attitudes of people changed over the course of your career, and has that changed even since you retired?
Yes and no. Like I've always been one. So going back to before I was in law enforcement, I got in a really bad car accident and I had some broken ribs, and I was bedridden for a while, and I got really depressed, and they put me on Xanax, and I think I took one or two of them, and I was like, I can't stand this stuff. I hated it. And so I didn't take it. And my mom gave me like a self help book or something. And I just started reading and reading. So I've always been reading, especially self help, self improvement books, looking to improve myself, my outlook. And so I try to always see the good in people. Even when I'm talking to someone who clearly committed a crime, I would literally sit and talk to them about doing the right thing. Like I didn't believe in them and like, oh, you didn't do this, even though it's obviously evident. But I just try to see the good in people all the time.
Mhm.
I'm not perfect, I'm human. Um, but you learn to see like when you're out in public, you don't want to be judging people constantly, but your instincts develop so well, your powers of observation develop so well that you can just know who uses drugs, who drinks alcohol, who does this, who has mental health issues. And you just so my whole environment is like when I'm scanning is just like knowing what's safe, which direction I want to walk, who I don't mind being around, who I can have my back to, who I can trust, people I don't know, just based off perception and powers of observation. So it does affect you, but I don't feel like I'm negative in that sense that like, oh my God, all people are bad. But it's easy. I've pulled over like 50-year-old women on their way to church. They ran a stop sign. You pull them over and there's meth on you. What are you doing with meth? Like you look and they're married and they have kids and they're going to church. Well, I've tried every weight loss thing I can, and somebody told me if I just did this for a little bit. I'm like, what has happened to society, you know?
Yeah.
So it can definitely put those thoughts in your head like, Jesus, everybody just committing crime and it's okay as long as I don't get caught. You know, I would, that would all the time. I was not a big traffic guy, but if people I didn't give a lot of tickets, but if people violated traffic laws, I'd pull them over and just have a conversation. Oftentimes you'd see burglary tools, stolen property, evidence of drugs, you know, and you'd end up with a good arrest just on a traffic stop, day or night, you know. But the one thing I always heard was, I'm sorry, officer, I didn't see you. And the sign says stop, right? Yes. Doesn't say stop when peace officer present, you know. It's like people just do what serves them, and you know, you just, yeah.
Do you think it's gotten better now that you've retired, or do you think you still have that vigilance no matter what?
My vigilance has gotten better, but as far as society, man, you know, I don't want to get into the whole role of what's gone on in the world the
Yeah.
last 3 years, but I feel like the last 3 years, like everything is gotten worse in that sense. Whereas more and more, I mean, I think it's starting to turn politically and all that stuff. I think people are starting to show appreciation for law enforcement and stuff. There's a long term where the cop is always wrong and I'm right. You know, I didn't do that, or I'm allowed to do that, or people just don't want to take responsibility for their actions.
Yeah.
So I think things are starting to flip. I think people are starting to wake up. But for the past few years, like I'm glad I wasn't involved in law enforcement because I'm not the kind of person that would do my job differently based on fear of the media. Yet, however, how many cases have people done their job within the scope of the law and practiced and still ended up defending themselves in court, or still ended up getting fired to prove a point or to serve politics, you know, to serve the agenda. And that to me is just scary. Like I have a lot of respect for the people that still do the job now, because um, I wouldn't do it differently than I did. I did it fair, I did it honest. But with the way they've handcuffed us in our abilities to do our job, I'd be miserable.
Any advice for somebody who's watching you that wants to go into law enforcement?
Yeah, do your homework. You know, do like I did. Go to a station, do ride-alongs. If you get serious about it and you get into the process, ask to read criminal reports. You know, you can go to any, at least with LA County, you can go to any sheriff station and ask for the report boards, and they'll hand you a board over the counter. Now, all the victim information and stuff like that is redacted, so it's, you know, you're not getting anybody's information, but you're getting the meat and potatoes of the arrest, what occurred, the behaviors, how, what the deputy observed, his observances, his fears, his thoughts, process, you know, all that would go into a very good report, because you have to be able to communicate all that in, you know, in a trial, in a criminal trial or something.
Hmm.
And you can always look back on your report, but you want to document all that stuff and have that recorded in your mind, what you're seeing, what you're observing, and how that relates to the criminal activity. So yeah, I would say definitely read tons and tons of reports, everything from, I was never a traffic guy, but everything from traffic. You can learn a lot from traffic. I probably, this is not to brag, this is just something that I made a strength of mine, and that was I knew traffic codes better than a lot of traffic guys, because traffic guys, they did DUIs and driving under the influence, or they did traffic tickets, and they knew their like lane changes, lane swerving, or rolling the stop. They knew all their little codes. But when you're looking for people that are driving around with guns in the car, dope and stuff, and they're driving, they know there's a cop around, so they're driving what they think is perfect. And you're like, well, I know that car's dirty. Um, how do I was not one to stop them and like make up a code. I would never do something like that. So I was like, what all codes do I have available to me? And like in California, at least, if your sunglasses are over a half an inch thick on the sides, that's a driving violation.
Really?
So yeah, yeah, because it depletes your visibility. So just, you know, and most everybody has sunglasses with big bands, you know, so that there is a reason to stop someone. It's an infraction, you know. It's
Wow.
not a moving violation, but it's an
Yeah.
infraction.
Yeah.
Um, Not making a right hand turn and ending it as close to the curb as possible. So most people move in close to the curb and they turn and they just go out, you know. You're supposed to. It says make it as close to the curb as possible and end it as close to the curb as possible, then move out into traffic. So just these little things would allow you to stop a car and have a conversation with someone.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So yeah, know your codes, learn all that stuff, and be observant. Be observant. There's one. Can I share one
Yeah,
story?
absolutely.
By be observant, my thing was burglary, and so criminal behavior. I would look for criminal behavior. I worked in the Antelope Valley. There was a whole sort of people. There was plenty of Hispanics and blacks on the east side, and then the west side was more predominantly white, although there were mixes throughout. And we had crimes from all races. There was nothing about it. I just looked for criminal activity. So two quick little stories. I'm driving through an alley one time and I see this guy and he's riding on a bike and he's leaning like this and he's trying to hold it up. And there's a shopping bag. So I pull him over. It's got a car battery in it. Why are you riding your bike with a car battery at 2 a.m? Oh, I got it from my buddy's car. Well, show me your buddy's car. I go over there. The windows broke. The hood's popped. He stole the battery. just looking at stuff like that, go asking question, why? Like, what is that or why? Another quick story of driving on the east side, and I see this young kid, and he's riding. I think he was 15. He's riding a bicycle, and the handlebars are like this wide. And so I go to pull up behind him, and he starts riding really fast, goes up a curb, and then I can't see him, and he jumps over a fence, and I hop up, and I'm pretty cautious about going over the fence, but I hop up, and here's the kid right there, and inside this blanket, he's got a shotgun, long barrel shotgun. And so I detain him and get it all, and I recover it as RC, possibly stolen, all this because of the way he's talking to me. A couple weeks later, I get back from homicide. They call me in to interview me, and it was used in a homicide 2 years before, where it was a drive-by at a gang, and they ended up killing like a 4-year-old girl, and that was a shotgun used, and it was all rusty. It had been buried in the desert for 2 years, and they paid this kid to go get it out of the dirt, take it home, and like dismantle it and destroy it. And so they didn't know who committed the crime. They ended up solving that murder behind this shotgun. But again, you see someone riding down the street, minding their own business, and the handlebars look a little bit wide. Most people probably wouldn't think much of it. They'd drive right by. Me, it's like, check that out. So just be observant. If something doesn't look right, trust the hairs on the back of your neck or your instincts, or
Yeah.
So I don't know. I had a lot of fun.
Steve, thanks for the interview. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure.